Friends, this D23 has simply overshadowed the Comic-Con announcements. It's now official. 2026 and 2027 at Marvel Studios will be dedicated solely to the end of the Multiverse saga with Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars. No third movie, no in-between project, and almost nothing to sink our teeth into on Disney+. After years of bad decisions, Disney and Marvel are slamming on the brakes to prepare for their renewal and avoid repeating the chaotic transition of the 2020s. From one saga to another, because my friends, we have to admit something.
Marvel is currently pulling itself out of a downward spiral that almost sank the studio.
A superhero fatigue that, along with bad decisions, could have led the MCU to the same tragic end as the DCU. Yes, but at the helm of this ship is Kevin Feige, probably the most competent and underrated studio head in Hollywood. A man who, once again, is about to work a miracle. And just look at the results so far for 2026, with the record-breaking Spider-Man and the announced slate for the next 2 years. Comic-Con and D23 are giving us a heads up. Marvel is cutting where it needs to. Marvel is planning meticulously. And Marvel won't make the same mistakes as in the past. Because the Mutant saga is the big dream of the cap-wearing boss. And brand Brian Udai has set us on the path of a run that you are absolutely not ready for. In this video, we will explore everything that awaits us, starting from Secret Wars, and how the MCU will be completely reshaped for its big revival starting in 2028. The era of heroes is over, welcome to the era of mutants. That's why, my friends, we're entering the spoiler zone, the danger zone. You're with Kevin Buchart, your favorite mutant, favorite terrorist. Opening credits, it's Kevin Buchart. Kevin. We have to save Private Marvel. This summer marks a real turning point for Marvel Entertainment. Between San Diego Comic-Con, which surprised everyone by announcing Ghost Rider and the new T'Challa, and D23, which told us more about the mutants, the MCU's renewal is taking shape and seems to be breaking with the past. The Mutant saga is beginning, and before we find out more about what's really in store, we need to understand where we come from. Over the past 20 years, Disney has acquired studios such as Pixar, Lucasfilm, and Fox. But none of these acquisitions has been as profitable as the purchase of Marvel Entertainment in 2009 for the modest sum of $4 billion. A purchase that followed the success of Iron Man and which gave birth to the MCU. An interconnected cinematic universe that needs no introduction and that made its mark on the industry from 2008 to 2009 through its incredible Infinity Saga. This concluded with the record set by Avengers Endgame and its $2.8 billion at the box office. 3 phases, 23 films, and $22.5 billion generated, it's simply unprecedented. But how do you follow up after such an achievement? Because the end of the saga marked the end of 2 iconic characters who carried this franchise on their shoulders, Tony and Steve. But that's not all. Because another legend behind the scenes retired at that moment. Disney's visionary CEO, Bob Iger, was replaced by Bob Chapek, and the former head of park operations who revolutionized the industry with Disney+. He wants to flood the market. People love superheroes, so we're going to give them more. Even more. He then appoints his right-hand man, Karim Daniel, as head of the Media and Entertainment Distribution Division. He is now the boss of the studio heads, the one who implements the boss's vision and who approves every streaming and theatrical release. A decision that will cause an uproar internally, since this new position completely short-circuits the organization and leadership, especially at Marvel Studios. This will lead to 2 terrible decisions, including the Black Widow case, which after COVID was released in theaters and on streaming without the agreement of its producer, Scarlett Johansson, who has since been clearly upset with Disney. A decision that Feige was firmly opposed to, and that's when everything changed. Kevin Feige is being listened to less and less, and his new boss keeps demanding more and more content. But at the time, he was alone at the head of Marvel, and found himself with dozens of projects to supervise, all without the freedom that had allowed him to achieve success. Between 2021 and 2023, no less than 10 movies, 11 series, and 2 specials were released in theaters and on Disney+. As many projects in 3 years as in 11 years of the Infinity Saga. But above all, no central through line. In short, between the change in direction, COVID, the Majors case, and overproduction, the teams are exhausted. The projects lose quality from one release to the next. Marvel is sinking, and all of Disney with it. Kevin Feige himself is starting to distance himself from his role at Marvel and wants to work on a Star Wars movie. Everything is falling apart. That's why, starting in 2022, Disney's board decided to fire Bob Chapek and his associates to urgently bring back Bob Iger. They need to get things back on track. In 2023, during the writer's strike that paralyzed Hollywood, Iger gathered his top executives and set a new course. Disney doesn't engage in activism and needs to return to prioritizing quality over quantity. When Dynasty becomes Doomsday, the goal is clear. Release everything that's been sitting on the shelves in 2025 and, starting in 2026, bring an end to the multiverse to reach the real objective, the mutants. Because the Multiverse saga was always meant to be a transitional saga. Ever since the Fox acquisition, Kevin Feige has dreamed of only one thing: finally creating his complete shared universe. Originally, Avengers Secret Wars was supposed to come out in November 2025, so the saga was initially meant to be twice as short as the previous one and to get us to the next one as quickly as possible. Secret Wars and the Multiverse saga were meant to introduce mutants and the Fantastic Four into the 616 universe. Spider-Man Brand New Day suggests even this idea is abandoned, as the mutants ultimately aren't from another universe. They're here, and Marvel has waited long enough to introduce them. In short, a lot of mistakes, but also a lot of bad luck, and above all, a lot of pride. Not only did everything almost collapse internally, through political games and exhausted teams, but Marvel also lost the trust of the public. That's why everything is changing starting this year. Less quantity, more quality. But not just that, more consistency as well. Because in recent years, we've mostly seen dozens of new characters introduced without any connection to each other. Stories so scattered that they have absolutely no impact, neither on the story nor on the audience. No one really got attached to the Eternals, Shang-Chi, the Marvels, the Fantastic Four, or even Sam as Captain America. Because in the end, they're just isolated stories. What made us so attached to the Avengers is that their stories crossed paths, especially in the Avengers movies. Steve and Tony were central to the shared story, and they were the link between all the others. In the end, the Multiverse saga didn't manage to properly introduce any character. The biggest successes are still movies with classic characters we care about. Even Thor: Love and Thunder, which is an absolute disaster, managed to make $760 million simply because we love Thor. And the solution is here. Fewer characters but better developed. There's no point in having 800 characters if you don't know what to do with them. So Marvel is completely changing its strategy. No more endless series and their batch of new characters. The series have added to the mental load for both fans and casual viewers. If you need to watch 20 hours of content before a movie, you might not bother going. Wonder Man, despite its critical success, is cancelled, and the Nova and Champions series now seem to be considered as movies again, or at least as specials. Disney is going to refocus on animation, especially for a younger audience, since it's less expensive and therefore less risky. And the Punisher special showed that some narrative elements can be developed in 45 minutes rather than in a 10-episode series. By the way, 2 could actually come out in 2027, but we'll talk about that a bit later. In theaters, we're going back to strong characters in highly interconnected stories. Before starting this revival, we'll let the audience catch their breath. That's why 2026 and 2027 will only focus on 3 films destined for glory to reignite the hype before what's next, giving themselves a second chance to really make a comeback like they should have done after Endgame. And the strategy is already paying off, with a Spider-Man that's going to easily surpass $2 billion and 2 Avengers movies that should follow suit. The machine is about to be restarted, and 2028 marks the return of a new MCU. 2028, the rebirth. While in recent months everyone was talking about a soft reboot or a reset, things actually seem to be a bit more complex. Or maybe simpler, I'm not really sure. Jean Grey's appearance in Spider-Man Brand New Day shows that, despite events like Avengers Secret Wars, the 616 universe likely won't change entirely. The X-Men will gradually form in the MCU rather than appearing all at once. And the public's distrust of mutants will simply come from the consequences of Jean and the Young Mutants' actions, who will start popping up everywhere. But we'll get back to all that in just a moment. Because even though the Mutants will be the very first project of the post-Secret Wars era, with a release confirmed for May 2028, Comic-Con also announced the other 2 films that will launch this new saga. The first one is the surprise of these announcements. Ryan Gosling's Ghost Rider will be released in July 2028, directed by Sean Levy, who directed the latest Deadpool and Wolverine. Together, they just finished filming the next Star Wars, Starfighter, and reportedly came to Kevin Feige with several comic-inspired pitches for a Ghost Rider movie. With Blade being cancelled, Feige needs a new entry point for his paranormal arc, and was reportedly impressed not only by the proposal, but also by the work done on Starfighter. Gosling, who has long expressed a desire to play Johnny Blaze, is becoming the new Spirit of Vengeance at the last minute. And if you don't know, Johnny Blaze is an orphan, taken in and raised by a motorcycle stuntman, Crash Simpson. Together they put on a totally crazy stunt show. But Crash falls ill and doesn't have long to live. Johnny then decides to make a deal with Mephisto, a demon specialized in shady deals, to save his adoptive father. He sells his soul in exchange for curing Crash's illness. But the stuntman, knowing he's doomed and unaware of the deal, decides to attempt the most dangerous stunt of his career. A stunt that will be his last. Furious, Johnny demands answers from Mephisto, but he says that the man was indeed cured and that his death has nothing to do with him. Johnny now owes him his soul. That's when Crash's daughter and Johnny's girlfriend step in. Mephisto, furious, takes revenge and curses Johnny by infusing him with the spirit of the demon Zarathos. He is now Ghost Rider, the demonic biker who punishes sinners. Especially with his special ability, the Penance Stare, which makes you relive your sins 100-fold. According to the latest information, Johnny Blaze would first appear in Secret Wars, then in his own movie. It won't be an origin story, but will show us an already established Ghost Rider, just like Marvel does now. We don't know for sure who the main villain will be, but obviously it will mark the return of Mephisto, played by the excellent Sacha Baron Cohen. But there's a good chance the demon will just be a background threat, especially reserved for a film like Midnight Suns. He's one of those villains you don't really defeat, but just send back to hell. However, it's possible that Blade's original villain will be reused here. In fact, Nia Goth was expected to play Lilith. The demon who brought the Midnight Suns together for the first time in the comics could very well be making a return. We should also see actress Rosamund Pike alongside Ryan, playing Roxanne, Johnny's girlfriend and Crash's daughter. So, the question everyone is asking is whether Sean Levy really has what it takes to handle the darkest franchise in the Marvel Universe. Personally, I have my doubts. The director is more often focused on feel-good movies or comedies, but he has still directed the excellent Real Steel and the latest Star Wars, which is said to be excellent. So, I'm open to being convinced. But clearly, Ghost Rider isn't usually here for laughs. We'll see. Because it's time to talk about the last film of 2028 with the return of T'Challa. Yes, Black Panther 3 will introduce us to T'Challa too. David Johnson will play the son of T'Challa, a very young child who has grown up a lot. So, well, we still don't know how the time jump will happen, since there's little chance they'll repeat the endgame mistake with the 5-year jump that completely messed up the timeline in the Multiverse saga. Yes, we definitely need to go back to a normal timeline. But he would also appear in Secret Wars, as shown in the famous concept art. The early details about the film suggest it's going to be a darker movie, a thriller that will play on the idea of passing on the Black Panther title and on the more spiritual lore of Wakanda. The focus on technology is over. This new Black Panther is moving in a more mystical direction. And it's not surprising, Toussaint was raised in Haiti, the birthplace of voodoo. T'Challa 2 will therefore have to reconnect with his roots while keeping his identity. And the idea is not to simply inherit the Black Panther, but to earn it inwardly becomes central. He will therefore have a duty and will be torn between his mother, Nakia, who refuses to see him take back the throne, and his aunt, Shuri, who will train him in Wakandan culture. It's confirmed that Mr. Denzel Washington will play the film's villain. We don't really know his role yet, but he will surely have a manipulative stance toward T'Challa, using his dual culture and dual allegiance to enter Wakanda. He could play the puppeteer Achebe or even the Shadow King, an extremely powerful mutant telepath who operates from the shadows. And that wouldn't be surprising, given that a very powerful mutant will most likely be introduced in this film, namely Ororo Munroe, also known as Storm. Unlike the other X-Men cast by Kevin Feige, Ororo will be cast by Ryan Coogler himself. And D23 reveal who will play her. It's Maya Boyd, a new face unknown to the general public, and that's a good thing. They want to make her an Omega mutant, the second most powerful in the MCU after Jean Grey, and show us the extent of her powers like they've never been shown on screen before. But above all, Storm's inclusion makes perfect sense. In the comics, Ororo Munroe is the daughter of a Kenyan princess and an American photographer. Together, they settle in Cairo until she is 6 years old, when a tragedy leaves her orphaned. She is then taken in by Amal Farouk, the famous Shadow King, who brings her into Cairo's underworld and turns her into a pickpocket. At the age of 12, she finds the courage to leave for Kenya on foot. Along the way, she develops her powers and is now recognized as a true goddess by the local tribes. She then meets a young T'Challa, who is also on his own rite of passage journey. After saving him from mercenaries, they decide to continue the journey together and develop a teenage romance. Until duty calls, T'Challa back and Ororo becomes Storm with the X-Men. It is only years later that the two reunite and get married, becoming the most powerful couple in Africa. And Marvel absolutely needs to develop this story in the movies. I love this couple, wonderfully connecting the rest of the MCU to the mutants. Now we're moving on to the mutant movies, the return of the X-Men. It's already been 7 years since we've had a film involving the X-Men. Yes, I'm not counting the New Mutants released in 2020, a troubled film in a troubled time. But no, it's official. They are back under Marvel's direction after 13 films under Fox in 20 years. 13 films managed pretty haphazardly with a timeline so chaotic that it's better not to think about it. So, in 2028, we're starting from scratch. This time, it's a real reboot. But what do we know about this film and this new saga dedicated to them? First, the cast. It was introduced at the last D23. Our new Charles Xavier is Christopher Abbott. Sadie Sink is of course playing Jean Grey. Pete Connor is Cyclops. Samara Weaving is Emma Frost. And to everyone's surprise, Indy Navarrete is our new Rogue. We've discussed Storm and we'll revisit the Adam Driver situation later. Some of them should already be introduced as early as Secret Wars. After paying tribute to the Fox X-Men in Doomsday, Avengers 6 should really highlight Jean Grey with a central role. But the movie could speed up the activation of the X gene in the population and already introduce us to some of its new members. The Mutants movie will then be the very first film after Secret Wars. A film directed by Jack Schreier, director of Thunderbolts, and written by the duo Lee Sun-jin, screenwriter of Beef, and Joanna Callow, who worked on the excellent series The Bear and on Thunderbolts. Both are known for their deeply human stories. And that's clearly what will characterize this new approach to the MCU. Because, as I told you at the beginning of the video, the era of heroes is coming to an end. With the introduction of mutants, having powers is no longer an exception. An accident or yet another attempt to create a new super soldier. Anyone can now develop powers. Humanity is evolving, and that's why mutants are so important. Because they consequently become a global threat to humanity. An aspect pushed by their biggest fan, Kevin Feige himself. While Bob Iger was still in office, he praised Kevin for big blockbuster X-Men movies. An Avengers knockoff, when the head of Marvel was actually pushing for an approach closer to the comics, more societal, more intimate. But Feige knew it. Iger didn't have much time left, so he accepted his approach. Before throwing everything in the trash the day after his retirement, to start from scratch and impose his own vision. So the Mutants movie should pick up right where Jean left off in Brand New Day. Yes, Jean's sociopathic behavior shocked everyone, myself included. But it wasn't pushed to the extreme for nothing. Jean is a young girl rejected by her mother, feared by society, and hunted by the god here. She says it herself, she considers people to be monsters. And it was only when Peter showed her that there was another way that she understood. Clearly, Brand New Day shows us how a teenage girl left to herself with powers can lose control, destroy herself, and destroy everything around her. That's why Jean is the perfect person to guide young mutants who are alone, lost, and left to themselves. She knows that anger and now knows how to handle it. But her actions cannot go without consequences. She manipulated, she killed, but above all, she demonstrated her powers on a large scale. And now, the god here knows and will use every means possible to prevent her, and anyone like her, from doing it again. And the god here has been hunting beings with powers for a while now. He first targeted the superheroes, but now he is searching for individuals considered dangerous who are hiding these powers. And if we don't forget She-Hulk, of course, so far we've only seen very few characters who have developed powers and have already mutated. That includes Kamala Khan, Simon Williams, Jean Grey and her sister. All of them are being hunted by the god here. But there are surely hundreds of others hiding. Except now, the god here has the technology developed by Peter to control them, the universal inhibitor. The one that will later be used for the power colors. And if you combine that with the Stark technology that the god here also has, it's not really hard to imagine how all this will quickly turn into an anti-mutant force armed with sentinels. Well, quickly. Not that quickly. Granted, there's a good chance that Jean is one of Charles Xavier's very first students, or even that it's her experience in Secret Wars and X-Men 1997 that helps him find new students to protect. But I have the feeling that this first movie will be the very first building block that connects the fate of the mutants and why we've heard so little about them in the MCU to their future as X-Men. But then, who would these first mutants be? Well, the first rumors suggested that the team would be made up of the original members of the X-Men, the very first team from 1963 created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Made up of Cyclops, Beast before his transformation, Angel, Iceman, and of course Jean Grey, who was called Marvel Girl at the time. But given the recent official and unofficial casting announcements, it might turn out that this team is actually closer to the one that was really successful. The one from Giant Size X-Men, starting in 1975. A team led by the legendary Chris Claremont, whom I affectionately call Grandpa Zazin, since he's so legendary at Marvel that nowadays he doesn't care about spoiling everything, and it's Kevin Feige himself who insists that the adaptation of the mutants in the MCU will clearly bring back the soap opera-style dynamics that made Chris Claremont's X-Men such a huge success. Yes, they're young, they're good-looking, they fall in love, they argue. In short, as he says, these mutants will be youth-oriented, and character comes first. And I love hearing that. For now, we officially have our Scott Summers. And it's Keith Connors. He's especially known for his role in the Netflix series Heartstopper alongside our Wiccan, Joe Locke. But that's not all. He's also one of the main characters in the excellent film Warfare, produced by A24 alongside all the young rising stars of the moment. Will Poulter, Joseph Quinn, Charles Melton, Cosmo Jarvis, Michael Gandolfini, in short, all future stars, all recruited by Disney. And maybe that's what makes this the most important cast. Because they will really be the two main characters of the next movie, but above all, the next driving forces of tomorrow's MCU, just like Steve and Tony were. Yes, they will be the leaders of the X-Men, but also their heart. Because according to Alex Perez, just like in the first season of X-Men 97, their relationships and their families will be key elements. Well, who else? Well, Maya Boyd, the new Storm, who, as I was saying, is unknown to the general public, but who has played the lead role in a Broadway musical for several years. Juliette. Regarding Charles Xavier, many names have been circulating in recent weeks, like Pelfrey, Bill Skarsgård, and even Tatwick Wilson. But once again, Marvel decided to go with a lesser-known face, that of Christopher Abbott. It's a strategy that has always paid off in the past, turning promising actors into real stars. You may have seen him as the Foreigner in Kraven the Hunter or in Cronenberg's Possessor, even though there's a good chance that, like me, the first time you see him, things are already heating up. But the biggest surprise of this announcement is definitely Ingrid Navarrete. Yes, the star of Obsession that everyone is after is our new Rogue, except no one saw it coming. She mentioned in an interview that she had met Jake Schreier and that she dreamed of playing Mystique. The director saw something else in her. He gave her one of the main roles in his upcoming X-Men. And she beat out Kaylee Spaney and Odessa Azion, who were internet favorites as fancasts. And if she looks familiar to you, that's normal. She played Sarah Cushing, Lana Lang's daughter, in Superman and Lois. I liked her back then and I'm glad she's now in the MCU. Rogue is one of the most interesting X-Men characters. For me, he was totally butchered in the first trilogy and was brought back into the spotlight thanks to X-Men 97. Indy will finally get the recognition she deserves on the big screen. In the MCU, she might begin as a villain or delinquent before joining Jean and Charles' team. Speaking of X-Men 97, you might have been surprised to see this character being extremely powerful compared to their version in Bryan Singer's X-Men. Well, that's simply because in the comics, or in the series at the time, she absorbed Carol Danvers' powers and, for once, kept them. That's why she's able to fly and throw huge punches. Now you know. Well, the big missing name in this announcement is Beast, since we learned this week that Charles Melton, who was rumored for the role, has apparently turned it down or at least hasn't managed to reach an agreement on a contract yet. Finally, the roles of Angel and Iceman could also be announced very soon, with rumors that Gen V star Asa Butterfield could play Warren Worthington III. We're not sure if other members like Diablo or Colossus will join later, but an old leak resurfaced recently. It's this little concept art that shows their presence. And as I was saying, Charles Xavier might, for now, only make an appearance. And as for Magneto, he would only show up later, when mutants really catch on with the general public. Well, if you're a fan of the first X-Men, you're probably wondering where Wolverine is in all this. Looks like Marvel still wants to keep using Hugh Jackman for a bit longer.
You damn straight it is. Fox killed him. Disney brought him back. They're gonna make him do this till he's 90.
So there's a good chance that a new James Howlett won't be introduced right away, but instead we see Wolverine and Deadpool going about their business in another universe after the Cyclops Wars. Yeah, I don't think they're going to get rid of the multiverse right away, but rather make better use of it. After all, why not take advantage of it? Well, no X-Men right away, but then what is this movie going to be about? A new Sinister world.
The X-Men lore is likely the most extensive in Marvel, so much so it could stand alone and still thrive. Yes, the plot, the teams and the villains are almost endless when it comes to mutants, so it's not so obvious where to start.
Well, maybe we can start with a rumor that was finally confirmed, the one about Adam Driver. At first, he was announced as Magneto, but he denied it and was rumored for many other roles. In fact, he even joked about it when it was announced. They finally have Nathaniel Milbury, also known as Mr. Sinister. And what's very interesting is that they insisted on calling him Milbury and not Essex. You'll see why that's important. Mr. Sinister is a villain many people first discovered in Season 1 of X-Men 97. He has already been announced as one of the main antagonists of the Mutant saga. But who is he really? It all begins in the 19th century. Nathaniel is a scientist who believes that his contemporary Charles Darwin does not go far enough in his theory of evolution. He is convinced that soon a new race of mutated beings will emerge. He then begins experimenting with genetic modifications on humans. And he is considered a madman by the scientific community and by his own wife, who, upon the death of their second child during childbirth, calls him a sinister man. His drive for evolution consumes him so much that he lets Apocalypse, the first mutant, transform him into a mutant. He acquires immortality and is capable of telekinesis and can adapt his molecular structure to become whatever he wants, or whoever he wants. But above all, he continues for centuries his work on humans and then mutants, even getting involved in the Weapon X program, the one that turned Wolverine into a weapon. An obsession that will lead him to Jean Grey and Scott Summers, whose mix of genes he considers absolutely perfect. Well, after that, things go off the rails with clones and time travel, so if you're interested in his story, I invite you to watch or rewatch Season 1 of X-Men 97. Mr. Sinister would be the Thanos-level villain of our Mutant saga, but that's not all. You heard it, he owes his powers to Apocalypse. And there's a wild rumor that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson will be our next Apocalypse. And even though I'm not a fan of the guy, I have to admit he really looks the part. Well, now you understand why the animated series X-Men 97 Seasons 1 and 2 focus so much on these characters. They are simply preparing us for what's next. And this rumor isn't the only one. Yes, Marvel seems to have cancelled quite a few series, but as I mentioned earlier, it seems they strongly believe in specials to introduce or develop some of their characters. And according to Jeff Snyder, 2 specials are reportedly planned between 2027 and 2028, with filming set to begin next February. The first one will focus on a solo character and the other on a team. But above all, the rumor is that one of these 2 specials will be connected to Mr. Sinister and a certain character from ancient Egypt. And what if, while everyone was waiting for the conclusion of the Multiverse saga, Marvel started introducing us to tomorrow's threats? Yes, remember, between Infinity War and Endgame, the Captain Marvel movie made perfect sense since it took place in the 90s and introduced an important character for what was to come. Here, the same strategy could be applied. But above all, as I was saying, Adam Driver introduced himself as Nathaniel Milbury and not under Sinister's real name, Nathaniel Essex. And that's no accident. No, Milbury comes from his family's historic manor, the Milbury House, on the outskirts of London. It belongs to a family of British nobles, the Essex family, and he uses this alias when he arrives in America. He will use the name Milbury throughout his long history whenever he wants to blend in. Notably to approach Scott Summers' grandparents, because as I told you, he is absolutely obsessed with the genes of Scott Summers and Jean Grey. But it's a name he mainly uses to continue his various genetic experiments, especially as an obstetrician experimenting on young pregnant women. Yes, it's Sinister. And in the MCU, we might have already seen the shadow of this Dr. Milbury, especially in the latest Spider-Man Brand New Day, since we saw that the DO Duo DC, under the direction of William Metzger, seems to be conducting experiments on mutants without any scruples. Now, at the very end, Metzger disappears without a trace, but we can hear that Jean de Wolf has discovered numerous secret files that Yelena will help decrypt, and which could contain other experiments on young mutants. That's why Sinister is behind most of these experiments, using the DO Duo DC and its resources to accomplish his work. And it's after this confrontation between Metzger and Jean that he would start to become truly obsessed with her. The fact that he presents himself like this suggests that Adam Driver will not be introduced directly as Mr. Sinister, but rather as Dr. Milbury, a shadowy figure who seems to be behind many threats. But also, why not, the Hellfire Club? Because during the period when he uses this alias in the comics, Sinister works with a very particular assistant, a certain Jacob Shaw, father of Sebastian Shaw, one of the characters who had been mentioned as a potential role for Adam Driver. A coincidence that isn't really one, since we need to talk about Samara Weaving and the Hellfire Club. There's an official casting we haven't talked about yet, that of Samara Weaving, who is officially our Emma Frost. A character who has already appeared many times in the movies, especially in First Class or Wolverine Origins, and who is ultimately not well known to the general public. And yet, what a character! Emma Frost is also an extremely powerful telepath. Coming from a wealthy family, she nevertheless ran away to try to make it on her own. A situation that led her into crime before eventually joining the Hellfire Club. And this is where we find Sebastian Shaw. For many, we only know the watered-down version from X-Men First Class. In reality, he is a very influential businessman in the Hellfire Club. Contrary to what people think, the Hellfire Club is not a club for mutants. It's an organization that, for centuries, has brought together powerful and wealthy men and women, offering them forbidden pleasures, but above all, connections, with the goal of influencing global decisions. A brotherhood largely inspired by the real-world version and some current scandals, led by the Inner Circle. A secret, very exclusive group whose members have chess piece names. And this is where Emma Frost's nickname comes from, the White Queen, herself a very important member of this circle. I was saying that it's not made up only of mutants, but some of these mutants are prominent members, because their abilities are very useful to the club, like Emma's telepathy, for example. Sebastian Shaw is also a mutant, but he doesn't make it his whole identity. His goal in this club is political and economic power. He has no morals, and is even secretly behind the development of the anti-mutant Sentinels. He remains a powerful mutant nonetheless, capable of absorbing any kinetic energy and transforming it into physical strength. Every blow, every blast, every projectile he takes can be transformed into strength, endurance, superhuman speed, and more. He can also heal himself, and is therefore able to slow down his aging, making him almost immortal. And that's where it all connects, because Sebastian Shaw is also linked to Mr. Sinister, since his father worked for the mad scientist. Worse, he allowed Sinister to experiment on himself and his son, genetically manipulating Sebastian. In short, I'm telling you, mutant lore is extremely complex, but there's no doubt they'll simplify all of that. Finally, Emma Frost starts out as an antagonist to the mutants, but she will eventually turn against Shaw and become one of the most important X-Men on the team. Just like Jean, she will also have a secondary mutation, which allows her to turn her skin into raw diamond. While with the X-Men, she marries Scott, and together they co-lead the Xavier Institute, especially when Charles Xavier is banished. We're still far from that, but now we know why the actors are so young. We'll have at least 20 years with these amazing people. That's the beauty of mutants. It's endless. Each generation takes the place of the one before it on the team, as older members become leaders and professors. However, this endlessness comes at a price. Won't all these mutants eventually overshadow all the other heroes? The future of the Avengers. Even though the X-Men are popular with comic book readers, they don't have the same impact with the general public as the Avengers. That's why Earth's superheroes can't be removed from the equation. Quite the opposite. Of course, the post-Secret Wars era will clearly take advantage of the introduction of all these new characters to do a major cleanup among the characters we've been introduced to in the Multiverse saga. But it will also allow the old heroes to shine while moving away from the endless escalation. Because that's been one of the major problems Marvel has faced so far. After the invasion of New York, there had to be a bigger threat, Ultron. Then an even bigger one, Thanos. And that's how the MCU was never able to raise the stakes any higher. Kang is proof of that, who gets ridiculed in a single movie by ants. Now, it's Doom, and Doom is clearly the final boss. Beyond that, we'd have to go in all sorts of directions. The arrival of an internal threat like the mutants, and the rift they'll create with the rest of humanity, is a blessing for the Avengers. And two storylines could open up for them. The legendary Avengers vs X-Men, where the omnipresence of these new powerful beings will create big problems, and where we can imagine, for example, that Hulk might be a bit upset with Jean. Or even Judgment Day. In this 2022 run, the X-Men create the nation of Krakoa and find a way to become almost immortal thanks to the Resurrection Protocol. On their side, the Eternals determine that the X gene is actually the same gene as that of the Deviants. They then decide that all mutants must be exterminated. The Avengers on their side, who have made a celestial carcass their new base, decide to awaken the celestial to stop this fratricidal war.
However, once the war is stopped, the Celestial decides to judge every living being on Earth to determine if they are worthy of the life granted to them by these same Celestials. Yeah, it's a real mess.
But in the MCU, we already have all the ingredients to adapt this story. A Celestial asleep in the sea, another one, Arishem, who decides to judge whether humans deserve to have been saved or not. Eternals in the middle of a crisis of conscience, and mutants just beginning to emerge. In short, I don't know what the future holds, but with the arrival of the mutant arc, which will inevitably come into conflict at some point with humans and their Avengers, but also with the paranormal arc, which will explore the darkness and Mephisto, not to mention the street-level arc of Spider-Man and the cosmos of the upcoming Nova. The MCU is starting a renaissance that no one thought was possible, and it seems that the best is yet to come. Let's hope that Kevin Feige has truly learned from past mistakes and that despite all this potential, quality will remain the priority over quantity. Alright guys, this video was extremely dense, but I had a lot to tell you before going on vacation. Analysis and theory videos are paused for a few weeks, but some surprises are planned to end the summer on a high note.